Hey guys, Travis here. I just recently finished doing a project for Much Music here in Toronto. And what we were doing was basically rebranding. We weren't rebranding, but we were doing a channel refresh for all the promo design. And what we went with was a sort of neon signage style look for all the interstitials and everything that gets broadcast. So I did a lot of work on it. I did a lot of research trying to come up with the way we were going to have these different signs look. We did some that were more complicated, some that were more simple, just neon tubing, some that were more of a fuller sign with different elements that were neon and different elements that were sort of tin letters and whatnot. But anyways, I thought I would sort of show you guys a little bit of how we created that stuff. So let's jump on in. I'll show you some of that work. Okay, so let me just start by showing you some of the... Here we go. Okay, so here's just the sort of general neon look that we came up with. And now this look, it's changed. We have been updating the look and using it in different ways over the last probably 2 months since we launched the channel refresh. But this is generally sort of the neon look. This is maybe a little bit glassier than we've done in some of the newer stuff. So we've got this, and then we've got it on, and we've got it in different forms. We used a lot of these symbols for some of our branding, and just seeing it on and off. These are just stills. We did this I just put this together for a friend who runs a local brewery, Liberty Village Brewing Company. And as you can see, we sort of use this tin letter look with some of the neon as well. There's a different angle, closer angle. We can use the straight up neon in real live action situations, which we did in this case. Here's another combination of sort of the neon glass underneath, and then sort of capped off with some sort of see-through elements on here. There it is again. But basically what I'm going to do is let me show you what we're going to be creating today, or at least what I'm going to be breaking down today. I put together this quick demo, and let's just have a watch. Okay, cool. Obviously things are more impactful when they have sound design. But anyways, so what I want to show you is I want to tell you about how I basically created this. We're going to go over how I created this sort of diamond icon in this neon design, and all the techniques that I'm going to talk about and whatnot can be used for whatever you're creating. I also did the words, the neon tutorial, or the all new tutorial thing, and this basically it's all the same techniques. The only difference is you have a lot more little connectors and things between the letters, so it's a little bit more time consuming. But I'm just gonna go through how I did it based on this one, and maybe I'll jump back and forth with the letters as well. So let's just look at this model and see what kind of elements we have here. So as you can see, right off the bat, we've got this sort of bracket. Now the bracket is literally just some cubes. Yeah, there we go. I didn't even clone them. I just stretched a cube. Well, I started with a plane for the background, and then I just stretched a cube across to make this bracket. Very simple. It's really nothing. And then I just threw a sort of shiny metal texture on there. And then one of the next elements you can see are these mounts. Now I know I wanted some detail. I didn't want too much detail, so I had to find a middle ground there. So we've got this this little sort of bracket on the bottom here, a couple screws, and the thing that grabs onto the neon. And this isn't too detailed. I don't even think I have a fillet. Maybe there is a little bit on there, but I'll just show you briefly how I put together the mount. So again, this bottom part of the mount is just a cube, and then on the bottom I just have some cylinders, just offset a little bit and shrunk down just to give it a little bit of extra detail, a little fillet cap on the edge of this one. The screws are just, oh wow, well, I actually used real screws here. Oh, okay. I forgot about that. I guess this was an original one that I made. In the stuff I've been doing lately, all I've been doing for the screws is taking a cylinder and shrinking it way down. Let me just show you that quickly. And I've been, let me just hide this so we can see what I'm doing. So I just take a cylinder and I give it a little bit of a fillet so that it rounds it out. Go to caps, go fillet, that's too much. Yeah, maybe like that. And then I just take a cube and I make this nice and tiny. Let's see here. That's probably fine. And I bring it up in place to be the hole. And basically all I used was a bool just to subtract the cube from the cylinder. And then you just get that. And that's all I've done. And then if I put it on, if there was a surface, I just sort of lined it up so that it was sort of like this. So it just looks like a screw head. And that's what I've been doing. But in any case, that's the mount. So I just had to make one of those, and then when we go into our project, I didn't even clone them because I found that I had to alter each of them individually, the grabber part anyways, to line up with the different tube, neon tube that it was supposed to be holding. So I ended up just going through and copying them. I have, 15 mounts here. And what I would do with the mounts is I would just go to the frontal view, and once I had my neon built, which we'll talk about in a sec, I just copy the mount, move it along. I would make this one, I'd copy it, move it over here, make another one, bring it up, and I just control the, let's see there we go. And you could just take the tube and sort of rotate it so that it lines up. You want to go perpendicular to the tubing here. Anyway, so that's those. But let's talk about the neon. So the neon is very simple. All I did was bring in some splines from Illustrator, which was basically just, let's solo this, which was just this. Actually, I brought in a single spline, and then I just redrew over the spline, and that's all that is. It's just the splines in whatever form you want, whether they're words or icons or whatever. Now, the thing is, when you get, let's see if I have the original for this. Yeah, okay. Here we go. Oh, maybe not. Nah, I don't have it anymore. Okay, well, so when you get the splines in from Illustrator, you'll actually have two edges. You won't have this single spline. You'll sort of have like an inner edge and an outer edge. And unfortunately, the way that I'm creating the neon, that doesn't really work because we're going to be using a sweep NURB. And what a sweep NURB does is it takes a spline, like a circle spline, let's say, and it'll basically wrap this around the splines that you want it to wrap it around. Now, if you have two, so if you have an edge, let me try to give you an example here. So see how it creates its letters? You got this side, but you've also got this side. So what it'll end up doing, it'll wrap the circle spline around here and up there. So you get this sort of double tube, and that's something we don't want. So what I would do is go into front mode here, and I would look at the letters, and I would just draw my new splines in the middle. So if we had this again, I would just do a spline. I would go up here, I'd grab the Bezier spline, and I'd sort of draw something like, I'd do that, and that's one piece, and then I'd do another piece for here. And then I'd build each letter. So that's what I did for, with the splines. Now, once I got the splines done, it was very simple. I just grabbed a sweep NURB, like I said. I'd throw all the splines in a connect object, just so that they all act as one. So there they are there. I'd grab a circle spline, and I'd throw them in a sweep NURB. So there you see the splines. Once I throw the sweep NURB on, boom, it gives it some 3D geometry. So let me just turn those off and on. So I turn the sweep NURB off. So there's the splines, and then sweep NURB on, and it creates that. And you might have to go in and adjust your caps. If you don't have fillet cap on, you get sort of straight edges, and didn't want that. So that's a simple fix there. So I mean, right off the bat there, you've got your bracket, which is just a bunch of cubes, and you bring in your splines, and you use a sweep NURB, and you got your neon tubing. And I just offset. I had the splines be at 0, so that I didn't have to move around each of the splines, whether they were letters or for the icons. And I just offset the background, which is just a plane, and the brackets sort of back in Z space, so that if I ever had to swap in new letters, I could just draw the letter or make a new text spline or whatever, and it would just be in the proper position. So after I did that, so the next job I would do is go around, and I would basically multiply or I'd duplicate these mounts, and I'd position them wherever they need to be on the bracket holding the tubes. And I'd go around, and like I said, I have maybe about 15 of them here. And then I figured, okay, well, somehow the neon has to get into all these pieces, and these pieces aren't necessarily connected to each other. As you can see, they're all standalone. I didn't want to have separate cords or like neon feeding tubes sort of into each piece. So what I did was I connected a bunch of them with these little connectors, and these connectors, as you can see here, these connectors are simply just the same concept as the tubes. I would go into the front mode. Oops. I'd go into the front mode, and I would just draw a spline. One, boom, 1, 2. And then I'd throw that into a sweep NURBS, and you'd get the tube. And what I would actually do is draw out all the splines first. So I go boom, boom. Then I'd draw a new one here to here. Then I'd pick, over here with a little Bezier curve on it, connect these, and I'd put all those together in a connect object again, as you see here. So here's all the splines in the connect object. And then once again, I just copy the same circle spline that I had in the neon tube, because I wanted it to be roughly the same size. And then I'd throw that in a sweep NURBS, and voila, I would just apply that, and now we got these. So just to offset them, because they would all, when you create the spline, it's in 0 Z space, and then I would just basically grab them all, and there we go, I offset them by 16. Just to bring them back just behind the neon tubes. Now, because they didn't feed directly into it, I thought, okay, well, I'm going to add some other little detail here. How does the neon get, it goes from this tube into the connector and then into the next tube. Well, how does it get in there? So I was like, oh, okay, I'll just use capsule. So I literally just grabbed capsules and just duplicated them and moved them around, created one in the proper Z space, and then just moved them around in the front view once again. So where's this one? Down here. So I just copy it. I just copy it, and I'd move it around. I go here, and I copy it, put one there, and whatnot, to get all those connectors done. So then so that's the connectors. So what else is there to build here? So essentially, we've got the neon tubes, we've got the brackets, we've got the mounts, and we've got the connectors. So the only other thing was the cords. Now, I mean, the cords, again, is just some spline drawing, very simple. And again, we're using sweep NURBS, just a much smaller circle spline to sweep around the spline path. And again, I would just go into the frontal view here, and I made the peg first, because I knew, okay, I want everything to wrap around a peg. So I just used some cylinders and threw a peg there. And I would basically draw a spline by clicking. I would start it here, and then I'd make a bottom. Whoops, I got the wrong splines here. We want to go Bezier. So I'd click here, and then I'd click here and drag to bend it out. And I'd click here, drag a bit, and then I'd pull it down. And then there's a nice smooth spline for the chord. And then I would just again throw the 3 separate splines in this case into a connect object, so that I only had to use one sweep NURB. As you can see here, here's the chords, right? So there's the 3 splines. Throw it in a connect, so I don't have to duplicate the sweep NURBs over and over. And we've got a much smaller circle spline. As you see, it's only 1.5 centimeters. Throw it in a sweep object, and boom. Now, one thing I noticed when I was rendering was I would get some jaggies. I would get some stepping in the splines, and what I found was a good fix is because this is normally set to adaptive, and once you go to adaptive, you can see that you get some visible bends here. So I would switch that from an adaptive to natural, and I'd bump that up to about number 30. So 30 subdivisions, I guess, along the spline. That made it a much more natural curve. Okay, so there's the chords. So I mean, very simple so far in terms of modeling. Nothing crazy. Now the idea was, there's not a lot we can do here. The idea was that, as you saw in the sample in these animations, we'd start in slow with a little rotate on a shot for like half a second. The next shot might be, tracking left to right, and then the final shot, there's only ever going to be 3 shots. The final shot was just going to be like a slow pull out and a settle. So we didn't have to go crazy and design, rooms and everything to put this stuff in. Although in some of the versions we did end up putting the signs in some 3D created simple rooms and whatnot, but not here. So so what do we have? What do we have left? I guess what we have next is texturing and lighting. So the textures are actually very simple. The neon texture is just basically a color channel, which is just white. I added transparency. I brought that down to about 81. Sometimes I jumped between 90 and 81. 90 gave it a little bit more of a glass, but I kind of like the washed out sort of look that I got with brightness of 81. Now the refraction, doing the research, I found some neon signs that were glass, some that were plastic tubing, and this refraction number varied. If you look up index of refraction charts, you can actually find the proper refraction for any material. I kind of cheated. I just played with this until I found one that worked for me. I knew I wanted to see through the stuff and see these mounts properly, and with certain numbers, it just wasn't getting the look I wanted. So even though it may not be correct, I found that 1.25 for index of refraction for this glass worked for me. Then I just added some reflection, very low here, with a little Fresnel filter. And that's it for the glass, or for the neon. Now the bracket, was just literally just a sort of dark, that looks sort of like a dark blue, really. Yeah, sort of like a dark blue, I guess. But it basically looks black, and then literally just a reflection channel, again with Fresnel filter on there. And I think a pretty narrow specular channel, so that we picked up on the edges. And that's that. And I basically copied that texture and put that also on my connectors. And now the mounts were very just simple, just white and black, just not metallic, more of a plastic sort of look. And I did use, I believe, for that, especially for this sort of grayish white texture, I think I used the Grayscale Gorilla Texture Kit Pro for that. I may have even started with a couple of the glass texture may have even been from Texture Kit Pro, and then I just changed again the refraction and the blurriness in the reflections. Okay, and now the chords are just a simple sort of black rubber look. So basically just a black color, and then in the specular channel, let's try to find that black rubber. I added bump, eh? Oh, this might be from Grayscale Gorilla as well then. because I don't think I would have added a bump channel unless I did. Either way, I don't think the bump actually even needs to be on, to tell you the truth. So it's just a black color with a wide specular, low and wide, just so that it's it's not so pingy in the reflections. Okay, so that's it for the textures, really. Very simple. And now the scene, I basically have just a general 3-point lighting. So if we pull out here, now this is definitely Grayscale Gorilla. I use Grayscale Gorilla Light Kit Pro here, and I just basically put a overhead softbox as the overhead light or the rim light, and then I got the key and the fill, and I just put those on sort of 35-degree angles from the object, and that was it for lighting, except for that I also used from Grayscale Gorilla HDRI Studio Pack. I used the Studio Rig, and in the Studio Rig I used the Diva Studio. So let's take a look at where that is. So Grayscale Gorilla HDRI Pack. So I use the Studio Rig. You double click on that, it automatically sets it up in your object manager. And I went into Studios and I used their basic Diva Studio right here. I liked the colors and the reflection, just a little bit of blue and the sort of bit of yellowy orange. It worked well for me. So I set that up, and it comes naturally with 100% brightness and 0% reflective brightness. I bumped the reflective brightness up to 80. And for the other lights, the soft boxes, I put that down to 50. I turned all the shadows onto soft shadow maps instead of area, because that worked fine for me and lowered my render time. And then the overhead softbox was up at 80. And we'll just take a quick look at how it animates on. So as you can see here, we've got normal sort of house, I'll turn the volume down, sort of a house lighting on, I called it. And the house lighting would turn off. We'd get it sitting in dark for a moment. Then it would start to flicker on, and we've got sort of the house lights off and just the neon on. And same thing here. So what I did was I actually, for the first shot, the close-up shot, or there was 2 close-up shots, so there's one that sort of is about this close, sort of moving slowly by the neon, then one that's out a little bit further. Those ones are animated, or those ones are rendered out as a sequence. Those are maybe 10 or 15 frames each, just a very slow camera move. And then for the final third resting shot that sort of sits back, I actually just rendered a higher quality still, because I was only going to be scaling out 5%, maybe 10%, but I think usually about 5%, just a very subtle pull out. So what I would do was I wanted to work in 32-bit, so in After Effects, so I would render out OpenEXRs. Oh, well, I didn't do that here, but normally it's set up to be an OpenEXR, and I've got ambient occlusion on. I'm just in the standard renderer, and global illumination is IR and QMC. Now, later I ended up discovering I liked using QMC and going into here and making sure radiosity maps was set. Now, I'm not sure why. This was probably like this, but maybe when I was fooling around, I changed some of the settings. So QMC for global illumination, which doesn't really do a pre-pass like IR will do. It does take a little bit longer, but it's got a nice result. Now, another thing I found that I could lower in here that gave drastic rendering time help was these numbers. Now, these numbers usually start at, I think, 0.1. Ray depth is usually 15. Reflection depth might be 10, and shadow depth 15, something like that. Now, these numbers are kind of arbitrary for you, I guess, at this point, but these are, I went through and tested, and I brought 0.1 down, or I brought it up to 3, which is downwards in quality, and brought this down to 5, 3, and 5. And I found this saved me about half the rendering time, and I did not notice a huge difference in the render. So what I did was I would render out, I'll show you the passes that I would render out. Okay, so I rendered out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different passes. So I would have the normal, which one is this? So this is the normal, no, the normal look with the house lights on, I called it. You can see this is a little bit gray. I wanted to be able to control sort of the color correction and levels of just the neon. So I also rendered out an object buffer. And now if you just throw the compositing tag, here I can show you that. these have, so I got this compositing tag on the neon, and I would just go into the object buffer setting, and I would select, I would just enable it, object buffer 1, and then when you go to render in your multiclasses, turn that on, add an object buffer, which you can add from here. It's right there, and then just set that to 1, and that'll give you sort of a Luma mat to be able to do a holdout in After Effects and affect certain areas. Now, if I just threw that on the glass, I would get an object buffer that had a lot of variant, a lot of gradient gray to white to black, depending on how see-through each section was. Now, I didn't really want that. So before I did an object buffer, I would actually just throw on a random texture that would be solid, and then I would turn off my ambient occlusion and global illumination, and then I would just render that out. I would uncheck save here, and I would just save the multipass, and I would render out the object buffer so that it would be nice and solid, and then that would turn out like this, so that I could really control the entire class. So I'd get the normal lights on, which is this one. I get the object buffer, and then I do a pass with, I turn the house lights off, which you can barely see, but I knew that I was only going to be seeing this, be stuck on this part for only a couple frames. So the house lights would turn off, and then you'd get this sort of just highlighted reflectiveness from the HDRI Studio Kit. And so I would do that, and then I would leave the house lights off and simply add a luminant texture, which in this case is just this. So again, I start with the glass. I actually do have transparency on and reflection, which I probably don't need, to be honest, but I kept the glass texture, but I would add a luminance channel, and what I found to be a good number was bumping the brightness up to 250%. Normally at 100%, you end up looking like this, so you can actually see that it still looks like glass, but I wouldn't get enough spill coming out of here. And yes, I could go in and maybe start dialing in on some other settings and global illumination and whatnot to have more bounces. But I found I would just bump this up to 250, and I'd get a nice glow, and it would sort of fall off on this plane in the background nicely. So I would just apply that to the neon. I would keep the house lights off. And by house lights off, I mean I would go into the overhead softbox, and I drop that to maybe 5%, just so there was still a little bit. Same with the softboxes, drop that to 5%, and the HDR Studio Rig, I'd turn the brightness down to about 20. And so that's house lights off. So really, the only light is coming from the neon, which is now on and glowing. So I would get that pass, which is here. As you can see, we get the nice sort of fall off affecting everything around it. We showed you off, and I just did a separate pass with a lighter material. So as you can see, we had the first one we had was this, so it's more of a cloudy sort of neon glass, and then I would also do this one. And the reason I did this is because I basically wanted the option of adding some of this detail back in over top of the neon maybe later, and controlling that. And what I would do is I would use an object buffer. I would use that object buffer that I showed you, this right here, and I would apply that over top of the final look, and I would use this as a Luma mat for this. So all that would come through over top of the other image would be this neon, and then I would just multiply it, or I would add it, and I would turn the transparency down, just so that I just get a little bit of hint of some of these like refracted looks of some of the mounts and things in the back. And by no means do you have to do it this way if you're going to go about it. I just found that this was the way I like to do it. So I would end up with 5 different basic passes to composite in After Effects. Now we'll jump into After Effects in a second, but I just wanted to show you in here just how everything is exactly the same. It's just got more of it. So there's more cables here because I basically wanted the neon to feed into each first letter and then come out of the last letter. So there's a chord going into the first and coming out of the last. Now because I have 3 lines, well, I had to have 6 chords, and it looks kind of cool to have all these chords bunched up. And you can have them sort of resting on things. They don't have to always just fall straight. But as you can see, it's all the same. It's just mounts, just a lot more of them where they need to be, and a lot more connectors, and takes a lot more time because you also have to draw out each of these letters in the frontal view, because as I said, when you get the text in, it's double-sided, so you needed to make it single. So that was the most time consuming for the ones that had words, but in the end I think it looks really cool. So let's jump on over to After Effects. These sequences are, again, like 10 frames for this close angle, and then another 10 frames for the second angle, which is a little bit further away, a little bit wider. And I would change the camera on these renders. I think I went from an 80 millimeter camera or lens in the first shot, then a 50, and then I would end with sort of a 35 on the wide. Or maybe it was tighter. Maybe I ended with a 50 on the wide, and then an 80 and a 120, something like that. Now, so really all the work, so I would just bring these in. I did a little bit of color correction, boosted the levels to get this white sort of, or the neon sort of whiter, because as you remember, let's see what the actual render looked like. Okay, so these came out pretty good. I just added a little bit of flares from Video Copilot's optical flares, added a little bit of screen grunge in the flare, a little bit of color correction, and added some sort of solids. Added solid with a mask and feather just to get sort of some different colors coming into the shot. And then I would basically just go through. So here's the third shot. So let's find the original. Yeah, so that's what it looked like in the render. So let's see, it was kind of gray. So as I said, I went here and I added an adjustment layer, and then I used the object buffer and as a lumimat for the adjustment layer, which meant I'm only going to affect the color of the tubes. And I basically just added the levels and just cranked the white so that these became nice and cloudy white, which I thought looked really great. Now, basically I would just animate this. I would animate the dark one on. See, it literally just pops off by a certain frame. And then I would take the neon on image that I rendered out, and basically, as you can see here, basically just keyframe the opacity so that it flickers on. So it sort of flicks on, then off, then on, then off, and varying, 25% opacity, 75%, then 100, until I wanted it to remain on fully. So what I would do is I would basically create a mask for this lit version, and I would just sort of sweep it over the course of the keyframes for the opacity. I would sweep the mask sort of from top left and over, and I would grow the mask so that by the time the last opacity keyframe went up to 100, the mask would be fully covering this, so that the neon sort of looked to grow on, as though the neon was flowing through the image. And then you would get this final sort of look. Off, flicker on, and then I did the same for this one. Off, flicker on, a little bit of push, and that's it. As you can see in that last bit there, I have some little dust, and that's just very simple particles. I don't even think I used trap code. I think I used CC Particle World or something just to add a few dust particles sort of moving by the camera. And again, this is just scaling up the still. So all this stuff at the end, all this wide. So that's a still. It's sort of sitting back. Lights turn off. It starts pushing forward. We've got the grunge from Video Copilot's optical flares that you can add in there. I may have added a bit of a glow around some of this. Some color correction. I think I added Red Giant's Magic Bullet looks, or Mojo, I think, to give it this sort of overall bluish, sort of crushed blacks look. And again, just some solids, some purple and pink, and a vignette just to give it some extra color, which I think looks pretty cool. Now I know some people might have some questions for some more specifics. I did actually attempt to record this as a step-by-step tutorial, but it really did. It took me a long time, and I didn't want to do it that way right now. So if you do have questions, put them in the comments or something on Vimeo, and I'll answer them if I can. I know this may not be a way that actual neon signs are necessarily built, but this is the way that I thought worked, that looked detailed enough to the untrained eye and was easy enough to build without getting way too complicated. Okay, so thanks guys, and take care.
Amazing.